Welcome to the Lynn Community Television Show. I'm Sean Donahue. Here with me today to talk about college financial solutions, we have Rich Biagiotti, MBA and CFP. Rich, thanks for being here today.
Thank you very much for having me, Sean. And I commend and compliment all of the parents and students for all of their hard work in going through the entire application process to all of these colleges. Now you're beginning the waiting game to make sure that you are accepted to those colleges. And we're going to be talking here today about following up with the next step.
So that's exactly what it is it's hard work, and we recognize that. And a lot of these parents out there who are working to find financial aid for their kids, it's the first whack at it for their own selves too. And a lot's changed from the time where they were in school. So we're going to talk a lot about that. But first and foremost, I want to talk a little bit about what you do. Now, you have a pretty extensive background and how long you've been doing this. So just in a nutshell, explain to our viewership.
For approximately the last 25 years or better, we've been actually working with parents and their students in completing the financial aid forms, so that our goal is that we do not believe that the student should be denied an education because of a dollar. And we try to allow that to enhance their position to not stop applying to a school because they think it costs too much money.
So this is the first part to a three-part series, and we're going to highlight the beginning, middle, and end for you in regards to the financial solutions for college financing. So I want to talk first and foremost about some of these changes. So one of the first questions you had asked me was, when did you first apply to college? I had said in 2004, and you started listing off some of the changes in regards to the process, and it was just overwhelming. I couldn't imagine what it would be like to be a parent today. The process is 100% different than what it was 10 years ago. Let's talk about some of these changes.
And that's a very good point, Sean. The material that you and your parents would have been required to fill out back in 2004 was paper and pencil only. There was not even any electronic way of filing that. And if I'm not mistaken, the financial aid people from the government have stated that this will be the last year that the paper FAFSA will even exist. So it is all done technologically as we speak.
So in your opinion, a guy who's been doing this for over 20 years, is it a good change or is it a bad change?
That's a very, very interesting question that you ask. I would say it's both good and bad. From the very basic, simple standpoint of filling out the form, it is a lot more complicated than it used to be. However, as far as the security is concerned, which we're all concerned with, across the nation, it is a much more secure application to be worked with, because there is a very, very large amount of data that goes into that financial aid form and could be used to the detriment by the student and the parent.
So is this the reason why we're seeing these changes?
Absolutely. And that is exactly why, because what we talked about, Sean, when we first talked about the original application, it was only required that you would sign with your name and your social, etc., and the same with your parents. Then that evolved to the point where, a few years back, everyone was required to get a 4-digit PIN number, and that PIN number would be used throughout their entire career of filling out forms for college, even including grad school. Now, last year, for the first time in May of last year, they had decided that they were going to create this FSA ID, which is the replacement for the PIN number. So people who last year had a PIN number, they will come on board right now and try to sign on, and they'll find out it does not work because it has been replaced.
Okay. So this FSA ID number, it's a big part of the beginning processes. So a parent goes and tries to apply for financial aid, and they're going to hit this obstacle first and foremost. What's your ID number? Where do they go from there? How do they go about and actually gaining this ID number?
And that's also an excellent point, because rather than putting the cart before the horse, as they say, and just rushing out and trying to get your FSA ID, we'd like to speak with you today about the process involved so that you don't end up making any second steps. And the process involved is basically having a certain amount of time and resources at your beck and call before you bother to sit down and fill out this form. That will avoid a lot of your frustration. So with this FSA ID, you will be required to go to the following website. It's called fafsa.ed.gov. And when you go to that website, at the top of the website on the toolbar, you will see something that looks like a padlock. And directly under the padlock, you will see the following letters: FSA space ID. This is what you're going to click on when you start this process. However, before you go any further, some of the required materials and information you need to have is you need to have access to a computer, and you also need to have access to an email while this process is going on. You also will need to have pencil and paper, because you will be required to write down a lot of what you do, because in the future, this information may be re-requested from you to continue using this FSA ID. The other thing is that we have spoken directly with 1-800, the letter 4, FEDAID. Those are the people at the governmental side of things who are actually will be your call and talking point to find out more information about this. And we pose the question to them. So you're telling us that each person that's applying for an FSA ID, which must be both a student and a parent, have to, first of all, have access to a computer, and they said, yes, that's correct. Secondly, they must have an independently, totally separate email address, which cannot be the same. So in other words, you cannot have xyzfamily.com. It must be two distinctly separate email addresses. Now, as you're going along with this, the other information you'll need to have is your address, your cell phone, and actually a way of obtaining an email while you are ongoing with this process and on the computer. So as we're saying here and sitting here, the first thing you'll do is you'll click on that FSA ID, and what will be brought up will be a brand new screen. And on that screen, about halfway down the screen, it will say create your FSA ID. Now at that point in time, you will click on this. That'll bring you to a following screen where it's asking you for your username. Frequently, people will use their actual name for the username, and there is no problem with that. The second question they will ask you is they will ask you to physically type in your email address. Then, the third line, they will ask you to retype your email address just to verify that it is true. Now, the fourth line on this, they will ask you to create a password. The password, they will not let you use your name or any part of your name. So that is absolutely out. There's also a little checkbox underneath that which will allow you to understand as you're starting to type in your FSA ID if it's meeting the requirements. Generally, the requirements for your FSA ID will be as follows. It's probably going to have to be at least 8 characters in length. One of the characters should be a capital. You should probably throw a number in there, and you should probably end it at some point in time with another symbol. So once you type this in, again, make sure to write it down, and also you must be prepared to retype that in again. Now, as the 1-800-4FED-ID people will tell you, this is very private information. Do not share that with anyone, even if you're going to the local school to have them help you fill out the FAFSA form. Do not share that ID with anyone. You would ask that person while they're working with you to allow you to sign on, and then you have your parent sign off and complete that. And I can't stress that enough.
So in order to get this ID, you need 2 people, the student and the parent. There's going to be a bit of a process to go through it, but it should be able to walk you through.
Correct.
Once you have this ID, you really shouldn't share it with anybody whatsoever. The biggest point that I really took from what you were saying was to organize what you're doing, take record of what you're doing, and keep a folder for it for future reference. This FSA number here is the first step in order to obtain financial aid. You had said that once you obtain it, that there are some guarantees. Let's talk about those guarantees.
Well, first of all, we haven't even completed filling out the FSA ID, because when you've done that first page, you now must click on a button that asks you if you're 13 years of age or older. When you click on that button, now another screen will come up, and the other screen is comprised of 5 questions. The first question will be a challenge question, which you will click on the drop down, and you must answer the challenge question. One of the questions might be, what city were you born in?
So security questions.
Security questions. Now, unlike many other security questions that you've run into before, the first 2 questions you select from their questions and provide an answer. The third question, which really throws everyone for a loop, is it's asking you to create a question. So out of the clear blue, now someone is saying to you, you must create a security question. Most people have not thought about what they want to choose for a security question. Well, the fourth question is also the same. They're asking you to again create a security question. One of the problems we have is they said, my favorite dog. Well, it's almost like being in Jeopardy. It says, what is your favorite dog, or what was your favorite dog? So in many cases, the way you need to be very specific in filling this out is precisely what will save you time. Now, the fifth question, which is also very important, it's going to ask you for a memorable date in your life. Now, that is unbelievably troublesome for a lot of people, because the first date you think about might possibly be your birth date. So when you type that in, that does not work. So be prepared, rather than getting caught short and have to think in a very short time frame, be prepared to know a specific date in your life. And the other reasons why you saw what Sean brought up beforehand, you need to have all of this material set aside to write this down. Because if at some point in your future you're away at college and they challenge you to make sure that your FSA ID is complete, they may be asking you to answer these challenge questions. And they will ask you 3 questions at a time. And if you answer it incorrectly the first time, they will throw in a different third question. But there will be a point in time when if you can't answer it, it will not work. And you must reestablish the entire process.
All right. So at this point, assuming that we're able to actually do all of this, we should have our FSA number intact. You had mentioned once it's obtained that there are some guarantees for the first year, second year, third year. Can we talk about that?
Sure, but before we even get to the guarantees, we're still not done.
Okay.
Because once you've just established that and you've gone through the 5 challenge questions, you'll hit the next screen. And the next screen will ask you, do you want to continue, or do you want to continue with verifying it? You want to click on continue with verify it. Once you click on continue with verify it, you will see a square block about this big come up. In that block, it will say, please respond and fill in this block with your secure code, which has been recently sent to your email address. You must type in that 6-digit code, and you will actually have received 2 emails. One will say what your 6-digit code is, and the other one will congratulate you on the fact that you've gotten your FSA ID.
All right.
Now, in answering and referring to the thing that you've been stressing on about the guarantees, anyone, regardless of their income, absolutely qualifies by filling out the FAFSA form and being able to sign that with your FSA ID, some guarantees. And our federal government realizes the stress that a lot of students and parents are going through to decide whether they should apply to a very high-priced school which they may not be able to afford. So these guarantees are in the form of called either a direct or either direct subsidized or a direct unsubsidized loan. The long and the short of it, even if you were a millionaire and you fill this out and your student fills it out and they succeed in doing this, when they get their financial aid package back from the school, part of the package will be comprised of a $5,500 direct loan, which will be established directly by the federal government and will be able to be awarded to you specifically by the financial aid officer at the college, which was never done back in your day. They never were able to give that and have that clout to make a professional judgment call to do that. The reason they're able to do that is because the security provided to them by this FSA ID. So now they are actually able to qualify you, and with the student's signature, only the student's signature, will actually be the recipient of that $5,500 loan, which will be broken up by semester their first year. Now the second part of that guarantee is the second year, that will escalate to $6,500. The third year, that will be $7,500. And the fourth year and the fifth year, if there is a 5-year program, it will be $7,500. Now that is to be actually granted to the student directly with no cosigner required. And depending on whether it's subsidized or unsubsidized, the loan interest might begin accruing as soon as the student has the loan disbursed to them.
Okay.
The difference there is if the parent and the student have need, then $3,500 of that $5,500 the freshman year will be in the form of a subsidized loan, which means when they graduate, they will not owe 1 penny more than what they started with.
That's good.
And it's very good, because the other thing is the students will not even be required to start paying these loans, whether the students have had interest accrued or not, until at least 6 months after they graduate.
Okay, so let's talk about. So they've got their number. They're ready to go. They've got loan options right there in the beginning for the next 3 years, and now they're able to go out there and apply for additional loans too. This isn't the end. Having your FSA number just means that you're ready to beginning. Are there any additional resources out there that maybe we can talk about, just to make our viewership aware, while they're out there trying to obtain their FSA number, that there may be some additional resources for them to get some info from?
And that's an awesome segue for me, because people do not understand the importance of that FSA ID. Because in many cases, the completion of that FAFSA form, of which the FSA is the basis, that is the beginning of what the colleges are going to award the student for financial aid. Because the FSA ID creates the FAFSA form, which when the federal process comes out, when it's completed with that FAFSA form, it's going to tell the school how much they think, the federal government thinks, that your student can afford to pay. So if the school really wants the student, and if the student requires the school and wants to go there, that FSA ID, the basis of the FAFSA, creates the basic part of creating a financial aid package, which is done by that person I spoke to you about at the college. Because the FAFSA form, the first part of federal aid that the student person at financial aid will be able to give you, and the largest governmental program out there, will be what's called a Pell Grant. Now that's free money. Now the only way you can qualify for that is by doing the FAFSA form. Then after the Pell Grant, there is work study. Then there are these loans that I just mentioned. Then there are other types of loans which are all based by the federal government. Then there are also even loans, for instance, in the state of Massachusetts. The Mass Grant is another loan which the Massachusetts Department of Education will look at those numbers in conjunction with the financial aid administrator for schools in the state of Massachusetts for which the student who's a Mass resident may be allowed to get.
So these schools, they're willing to work hand in hand with the federal government to get financial aid for these students if they want them there. See, that's outstanding. I worked in staffing for about 4 years. I staffed clerical people at the state level. I staffed doctors on the national circuit. And I can tell you this, as a staffing agent, okay, as a person who would recruit people, it didn't matter what school you went to. All that mattered was that you had a degree in the applicable field. I can't stress enough to the parents and the students out there, while you're out there going and looking for schools, make it easy on yourself and go with these state schools, go with the schools that are willing to help you get out of it debt-free. That is, if there was any lesson that I learned in school, the biggest lesson was how to get out of debt. Time management, all of that stuff, a big part of school, and then you're on the social circuit too, learn how to interact with your peers. But if there was anything that I could change about college, would be getting out of it with less debt. And that's exactly what we're talking about today. We're talking about these changes here and all this bureaucracy. And as a parent, somebody who's already been through the financial aid process, this is a little overwhelming. And it may probably raise some questions like, why is this going on? And here we are talking about the solutions that it's actually providing. That is outstanding. Look, you're a parent out there looking for school, okay? There's no better thing than just getting your degree. Doesn't matter where you went to school, okay? Yeah, you might be able to have a network, Joe Schmo, because you both went to Clemson or you both went to Harvard or whatever the case may be. That can help you out. But is it really worth that money to take a risk like that? We got about 3 minutes left in the program. I just want to kind of bounce this off you. I mean, getting out of school, debt-free. I mean, other than gaining your education, would you say that's a top priority?
Absolutely. The other thing, that's an awesome point, Sean, because a lot of times now that your student has decided or is deciding what they want to get their undergraduate degree in, for the most part, many students are talking about going on for a graduate degree. I had a client in my office a few years back, and I said, Nick, what's the matter? And he said, well, I got into 2 schools and I do not know which one to pick. And I said, well, you know that in the degree you're going to go into, you need a master's degree. He said, oh no, I already know that and I know where I want to get my master's degree. And I said, do yourself a favor. Please call the admissions office at that graduate school and put it right to them and ask them, where do I have a better shot at getting into your school, graduating from this very high-priced private university or this very well-known local state school? You know what their answer was? They consider them to be both tier 2 schools, so it didn't matter. He obviously went to the local state school because it did not stop his going to the advanced degree.
Right.
And the other thing is with state schools, as you're saying, if there are any of you who want to go into that noble profession called teaching, I would say if you were going to go to school out of the state of Massachusetts, ask them at the graduate department of their educational process, what is the number of students that pass the MTELS test in the state of Massachusetts the first time? If they can't answer that correctly, make sure that you're aware of that, because without passing that test, you don't start the job.
All right. I definitely, Rich, I can't say how awesome it is to have you on this program and really clear up all this information. For those of you at home, this is part 1 to a 3-part series. We're talking about obtaining your FSA number. What you got to do, you've got to get this process started. Like we had talked about, work with these schools, call the admissions office, talk about what you're trying to achieve and see if they can help you out. You might find that they're in the same level as the other school that's on your plan B, and it might make more sense for you to go with plan B. So in regards to school, financing is a big part of it. Your number 1 goal obviously is graduating with a degree, but your close number 2 is getting out of it with as little debt as possible. When we come back with Rich, we'll be talking about actually filling out the FAFSA forms with our ID number. Rich, can't thank enough for coming on to the program. Rich Biagiotti, MBA and CFP. We're here talking about college financial solutions. We've just talked about the FSA number. Join us the next time where we talk about filling out your FAFSA forms. That's it for the Lynn Community Television Show. I'm Sean Donahue, wishing you all the best.